So this chat here gets to deal with epithelial tissues, and epithelial tissues are one of the four major groupings of tissues that we happen to have in our body. So what we're going to try and focus on in this particular video is how we can identify what their job is off of what they look like, because structure turns out to equal function. The lecture happened on back to school night, so that's why that was there. And I'm sick. So if I look at a cell, they're more than just bags of liquidy stuff and then a membrane on the outside. One of the things that you'll turn out to have will be a protein network that creates what we would call a skeleton. We happen to have a protein network inside of us, inside of our bodies, that we call a skeleton. Cells are the exact same way. So if I look at the inside, there turn out to be a whole bunch of these different proteins, and they all turn out to have a different job. So the screen has them listed, but the cytoskeleton does two things, basically. It provides a shape for the cell, and it also allows for motion of the cell, much like how our skeleton provides a structure for us, and it also allows for motion. The catch is, cells aren't just a skeleton on the inside. They also extrude, they release proteins that create a skeleton on the outside of the cell that we call the extracellular matrix, or the ECM that you see on the screen. The ECM, the extracellular matrix, helps stabilize where cells are, and it allows other cells to interact with each other, and when they do that, weird things start to happen. The thing is, how things are built tells you something about how they do their job. If you have a car wheel, it's round because round allows it to roll. If it were a square, it wouldn't roll so great. If you want to have something that can take a photo, like this screen right here that I'm pointing at, you need to have an aperture or something that allows light to come on in. Otherwise, there's no way to take a photo. How something is built tells you a little bit about what it's probably going to do. So if I can start to connect cells together through that cytoskeleton on the inside and maybe the extracellular matrix on the outside, they can start to do stuff. And that's exactly what tissues are. They're clumpings of cells that, when all bound up together, do a particular function. There are four major types of cells, so if we start with epithelial tissue and just swing our way around clockwise, epithelial tissue turn out to cover and line stuff, meaning if it's a surface, it's epithelial tissue. If you have a tube, the inside of the tube is epithelial tissue. Nervous tissue conducts information. So it will process information from the outside, information from the inside. Something happens, how do you respond? Nervous tissue will figure it out. So it does a bunch of chemistry and physics stuff. Muscle tissue is capable of changing its shape, and that's its point. By it changing its shape, it can move stuff around, so it's there for transportation. The last one, which is connective tissues, is kind of like the fill-in-the-blank of everything else, meaning if you have skin on the outside, which is epithelial tissue, and you'll have muscles and nervous tissue on the inside, everything in between is connective tissue. Sometimes it's there just as a space filler, sometimes it has a specific name, like bone, but we'll get to that later. So epithelial tissues are coverings and linings. They are on the surfaces of stuff, whether it's the outside of a surface or it's the inside surface, like inside of a duct or something like that. Those will always be epithelial tissues. And the thing to make it work is they need to be clumped together, kind of like a quilt. So a quilt is a whole bunch of different pieces of cloth that are all sewn together to make one collective whole. The way that we connect all the cells together is through things that we call junctions. The screen has 3 junctions on there. To name them, on the left-hand side, those are called gap junctions. The one in the middle are called desmosomes. The one on the right are called tight junctions. We don't know about, and we don't need to know any of their names. Gap junctions will show up later, but right now we don't care. All 3 of them glue cells together. And epithelial tissues, more so than all the other cells, really need to be glued together because they make a covering. They make wrapping paper. So we need all the parts to hold together. When we name these cells, or these tissues, we base it off of 2 things. The first one is, what do they look like? The second one is, how many layers are there? So the first one, what do they look like? If I look at all these cells from the top, they all turn out to be round. The way that we reveal what they are is by looking at them from the side. And When we see them from the side, we get three distinct shapes. One of them is a scale. Fancy word for a scale is squame, so we call it squamous. I say pancake in class. If it looks like a box, we call it cuboidal because it's kind of like a cube. And if it looks like a tall column, we call it columnar. Seems to make sense. One of the issues that shows up with the epithelial tissues is if you don't cut things perfectly on the side, you cut it at an angle, these might not look right. And it's one of the difficulties of the slides is when you look at some of these, you go, wait a second, that doesn't look like what it's supposed to look like, and that's because of the way it got cut. So we can name them either squamous, cuboidal, or columnar. What I can now do is say, are they stacked or not? If I have one row, we call it simple. If we have multiple rows, we call it stratified. So if I have one row of pancakes, simple squamous. A whole stack of pancakes, stratified squamous. One row of cubes, simple cuboidal. Stack of them, stratified cuboidal. So on. The way that you can tell if it's stratified or not is you look at the nuclei. The nuclei are the things that turn out to help answer this question. So what you should have are all the nuclei in a row. So if the nuclei are in a row and there's two rows of them, hooray, we happen to have something that's stratified. There's one exception where it looks like they're jumbled all over the place, and that we call pseudo-stratified. That's because it looks like it's stratified, but it's really not. In reality, they're actually a whole bunch of just different size cells. When you look at the nuclei, they tell you something about their shape of the cell. So if you had simple squamous, which is a pancake, the nucleus is a flat pancake. If you have a cuboidal cell, the nucleus is going to be cuboidal-ish shape, meaning it's going to be a circle. If you have a columnar cell, the nucleus is going to be tall, like it's a column. So the nuclei reflect the shape of the cell, which is, in part, a giveaway.